This is Ivy Unleashed, a Gold Ivy production. Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. Today is a special day because we are talking about a topic that is a little touchy, but everyone can relate to something within this topic. Whenever we talk about alcohol, we talk about our own experience, and we have a lot of listeners that tune in to hear about it because alcohol is everywhere. A lot of people struggle with their relationship with alcohol. So we brought in recovery coach Patty Powers. Welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Hey, ladies. Thanks for asking me to come.
Yes, we found Patty Powers through Terry Cole, who we had on the podcast. She talked about boundaries, and she's a powerhouse herself. But then listening to Terry Cole's podcast, I heard a few episodes with Patty Powers on it talking about your story and the work that you do. And Patty, we would love for you to share your story and your own experience with addiction.
It's impossible to just go straight to the drugs without going to the childhood. And anybody with any kind of substance problem who might not relate to that, if they get clean, they will see that it all leads back to those early years. So I was an only child for the first 13 years of my life. And during the first 10, my parents were in their 20s, so I was born in 1960. The pill didn't come out till I was about 10. So people were falling in love and getting married at 18 prior to that, and so my parents, they were in their 20s. And now that I'm older and I meet people in their 20s, it's a lot of responsibility to own a house and be playing grown up, like really to be playing grown up, having a child there.
Yeah.
And so my father was an alcoholic. My mother had never been around that before. And he sort of hid it. I found out later that when they were dating, after he'd drop her off, then he'd go and get hammered. So she had no idea really what she was, marrying into. And, so as his alcoholism progressed, her nerves were getting so bad. But it was at a time when third generation believed priests, teachers, anyone in a position of authority you didn't question. They just that was it. So doctors were putting her on Valium like they were putting all mothers on Valium in the mid 60s, and she went down to 75 pounds and had a nervous breakdown at some point. So nobody, I never doubted that they loved me. I mean, I know 100% my parents completely loved me. And they really tried to hide what was going on between them from me. And no matter, my father he was just a kid. He wasn't violent. He wasn't abusive. He was just the kind of guy who on payday wasn't home for dinner. And then as the year, a few years into it, on payday, we would go out and go to all the bars to look for his car to get his paycheck before it was gone, before he got rolled or, it was on the house for everyone. So, no matter what was going on, I just remember I'd go to sleep and at some point I'd be in someone's arms being carried to the car, and I'd wake up at my neighbors or my aunts or my grandmother's. And then in the morning I go back to school like nothing happened. Right. So they were doing their best to protect me, and my father did get sober, and he's been sober since I was 10. And my brother was born into a sober household, but and my mother, I remember the day she threw all her pills away because she realized that they were killing her. She'd been just trusting doctors, but she realized that they were killing her. So, but when my dad got sober, the solution was, we're not going to talk about the past because we don't want to get dad upset. So suddenly I'm 11 and I'm about to go into middle school the next year with all new friends. And it's 1971. And I just decided adults were full of shit, right? It was just don't believe a word they're saying. And what was on television was the counterculture and the student uprising and Vietnam and all the stuff coming in from America, because I was in Canada, and the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers. And for some reason, all that stuff just spoke to me because it was truth to power. So like I just started to find, because I was a lonely kid too, because my dad was really funny when he was drunk. And friends would go home and probably talk about how funny Patty's drunk dad was, and their parents just didn't let them come over again. But I didn't understand what was going on. So, you internalize all this stuff. So when my dad got sober, and my past disappeared, and I was in this house that I didn't really recognize, and I was waking up in my own bed, and all the excitement and drama and all of that was gone. I had to do, this is like such a long intro, but
I love it. Keep going.
I hadn't thought about it in years. Mm-hmm. I really didn't even know what was going to come out of my mouth. In the 6th grade, I had to do a public speaking. So that was something that was part of our thing, right? We all had to get up and talk for 10 minutes. So I went through my dad's paperwork from his rehab, and I made my speech on addiction. And I even wrote a poem, and I can still remember parts of it, And I had never, I was a really good student who never, I was undiagnosed ADHD until I was 54.
Wow.
So really, if something interested me, I was all in, hyper focus. If something didn't interest me, the clock could not move fast enough. But I did good in school, so it went unnoticed, right? But I'd never been so obsessed with a topic for my public speaking. Like I was all in, and I swear to God, within 6 months, I was getting high.
Wow.
Lady Sings the Blues came out. Lenny about Lenny Bruce came out. Like I was 11, but those characters who, at the end die of heroin addiction. But like, I loved those movies. I was like an 11-year-old who was like, I understand what Billie Holiday's feeling. I understand those blues. I understand what Lenny Bruce is going through. I understand that loneliness and that kind of that emptiness. But I had no words for it. So like my childhood shaped me, and the changing culture definitely influenced me, and my quote that I'm going to give you later, I was like, what's honest for me? I'm looking at Gore Vidal and Tennessee Williams because that's who I am. And then I was like David Bowie, at 12, this figure appeared that nothing had been like it before. And I was finally old enough to catch something as it was happening. And so I pulled a quote from one of his songs. But, so that brew set me up. But, it set me up in a way that was interesting. It was, there was always a curiosity behind it. There'd be like a singer, like punk rock started, there'd be a singer who would like probably never read them, but would like start quoting French writers. So I would go out and read those French writers because I thought that's what older people were into, or somebody would, Iggy Pop named an album The Idiot. So I started reading Dostoevsky. Like, there was something, I was just like picking up crumbs along the way, but it put me on a path that, I feel like I was supposed to be on. Like I don't really look back and go, oh, that was so tragic. What I look back and see is that I had young parents who didn't have skills to pass down to me, and they did the best they could. It really could have been a lot better, and they weren't withholding. They just didn't have it. They did the best that they could think of doing, but it left me where, and I know all of this stuff now, from just being clean and sober for so long and working in this business. And because science and psychotherapy has changed, and the definition of addiction, what makes an addict, has shifted a lot over the years. But one of the things it lands on is an inability to process and regulate emotions. So when you have a childhood like that, and then you find drugs to manage your feelings really young, you don't really you bypass having to learn how to do it, right? And so, statistically, people who start smoking weed or drinking or, taking Molly or doing whatever, when they're like under 17 are more likely to have a substance abuse problem later, because that was their coping mechanism. Side note, a really good friend of mine had a little girl who I watched grow up. And then when she was 11, I took her out and she was so sweet. And when she was like 12 and a half, I took her out and she was just a little witch. And I couldn't tell my friend. I just thought, what happened to her? She's just like this spoiled valley girl now. Like, what happened? And I couldn't tell my friend because it would have broke her heart. And years later, the next year, her kid was fine, And so when her daughter came and stayed with me, I was her 18th birthday present. She came to New York and we hung out for a week. And I mentioned it to my friend. I go, there was this time, and she goes, she was in puberty. That's puberty. I go, we weren't like that. She goes, we were on drugs. Through that, and that's how they learn to regulate their emotions, how to deal with disappointment, how to deal with insecurities. Like, you learn all of that growing up, but if you have a cushion, you don't really have a reason to learn it. So then the longer, you're using, by the time you're an adult, like, you have no coping skills. It's just all smoke and mirrors. It's like the audience, just making sure everyone thinks that you're as together as you appear, because you're capable, but like no one knows on the inside. Like, you just feel like a fraud all the time, like you missed something and like someone's going to see it and see through you. There's just that little shadow feeling that goes on of just not knowing yourself, no matter how capable you are and how much you can excel at things. And and I really, like, anything I wanted to do or any place I wanted to be or people I wanted to meet, like I was always able to get there.
So when did you, how did you get access to drugs, and when did that start?
Well, I mean, it started shortly after I did my little public speaking thing, because I knew what all the drugs were and how they'd make you feel.
Yeah. So you saw from
a lot of it was the image too, because those kids, like, Go Ask Alice, all these made for TV movies came out about the girl who runs away from home and ends up with her hippie friends on drugs, having a bad trip, and then wants to go home by the end. And then her little sister follows in her footsteps and leaves. Those movies were made for TV. They were on all the time. And it just looked better than real life to me. It looked like an adventure. And I thought, I don't want to sit at home and watch these adventures. I want a life that is an adventure. And so I just found it and went on that path. And luckily for me, it really was about literature and film and art and music, so I found like-minded people, and they were interesting people, and they were creative. And it also kind of justified this underground lifestyle that we were living, until everyone starts dying and everything that you cared about, you lose. But when you're young, you can lose everything and pull it all together really fast and get it all back in a whole different situation, But as you get older, it's just like you're inside a hurricane or a tornado. It's like you're in a tornado and you just hope you're going to get spit out, but you keep getting pulled further and further down, and it inside, and so you have to keep in mind, this was the 80s. People weren't going to rehab. There wasn't Dr. Drew on TV and sober houses. There wasn't intervention. There wasn't the show I did. There was none of that, right? So it was like you were on your own. And I didn't know anyone who'd ever gotten clean, right? So I really took it to that last day where I knew that I had to make a decision that day and get on a bus and go home and ask for help, because my parents knew nothing. I hid it from them the whole time.
How old were you?
I was 28.
Oh, wow.
And now what I've seen over the years is, whether someone's an addict or not, between 26 and 28 is a really difficult time growing up. Because
I'm raising my hands over here.
Just because, you can be like, I'm a kid. What do you expect? If ever I'm going to be able to do this or that or whatever, be irresponsible or just walk away from everything and go to Spain, it's now. And then you hit a point where you go, oh, I'm not a kid anymore. But who am I? Who am I? I mean, it's really that, like, who am I? Because up until then, it's like you kind of know, and you're just busy because everything is brand new and it's exciting and sparkly, and you're just in life. And then suddenly it's just this fear of like, I have to get my shit together. And I watch a lot of people go through it, whether they have a substance abuse problem or not. I think it's just a difficult time. It's like it's like a second puberty. But it's also when your brain stops developing. It's right then, right? Because your brain is developing. They say if you can hold off drinking and using drugs till you're 25, chances of becoming an addict are much lower. It's just while you're in brain development stages, it definitely, like, I wonder how I even have any brain cells, to be honest. Like, who would I have been if I hadn't taken like hundreds of hits of acid when I was 12?
That is wild. And if we think about your brain forming during your early childhood, you had all this drama and then it disappeared. But that was normal to you, right? That's what all you knew. So it's almost like you were trying to get back to that drama. You created that drama. And from 12 to your late 20s, what was life like in there? Let's give our listeners, just said acid
and heroin.
Well, it's like, when you're a child of an alcoholic or you grow up in a dysfunctional family, I'm just letting you know right now, if you're listening and you're not an addict and you're not in a relationship with an addict, but you come from that background and on the inside, you just sort of feel like you didn't really get all the how to live tools that it looks like other people have. You can go to a program called ACA. It's free. It's a 12-step program. It used to be adult children of alcoholics, but now they added and dysfunctional families. So you don't even have to have alcoholism in the family. It could be mental illness, undiagnosed mental illness in the family, like a mother who was in postpartum through your childhood. It could be anything. But like, it's something, even to get the book that they put out and just read it, you might see yourself on every page. So you don't have to be an addict to find freedom from just an undefined existential despair that kind of lingers like a shadow and pops up, that waiting for the other shoe to drop when things are going good feeling. I used to just think I just thought that was being human, and every now and then I'll meet someone, I'll go, you must have had really well-adjusted parents. Because they're so rare.
It's so true.
And, and a lot of times people will be adults before they realize that their mother was drinking every day. Like, it will have just eluded them through their childhood because she wasn't a fall down drunk, or suffering from depression. Like, they'll be an adult and then be in therapy and they'll be like, oh, that really impacted me. Like, when I went to rehab, I remember having a counselor and saying, well, my dad's drinking didn't affect me. And I meant it. And I remember being in like a 12-step meeting and people were talking about how they use drugs over their feelings. And I just felt so sorry for them because I just used drugs because I was a wild child. I like to have fun. Like, and that was like my truth at that moment. Like, I could not identify, but, drugs, alcohol, weed, I'll throw weed in there because a lot of people are smoking a lot of weed and they're just not even adding that in. They'll be looking at how much they're drinking, but they forget to add that in, or they forget to add the Xanax in that they sort of lied to a doctor to get. It's always over feelings. It's always to change how we feel. And, so with me at the end, I just really had to take it to get on a bus and go home and ask for help. You can't put it off one more day because you will not be alive. But, I ended up, what I knew was that I'd been exposed to recovery. It was starting to creep in to the music industry circles I was in. And people were going to meetings like people in bands that I knew were going to meetings. And I just thought, oh, I thought it was going to be just like people I couldn't relate to. So I was kind of curious, not curious enough to go, but I kind of knew that that was happening a little bit in California. I was living in LA at that point. And so I went to a couple of meetings. I couldn't really hear much. I just remember them saying being willing to go to any lengths to get clean. And so the night before I got on the bus to go home and ask for help, I just knew that all the different ways I had tried, like, I'm just not going to do drugs, I'm just going to drink. I'm just going to take amphetamines and smoke weed. I'm not, it would always eventually go back because nothing is going to, do the trick the way the thing that works for me does the trick. And everybody has their drug or their drink that makes them right. Even though it's, when people say it stopped working, it stopped doing it. To me, a really, the way I understand it for me is that I could be in withdrawal, crawling on my floor, being like a total drama queen, crybaby about it, and believing it all. And then if someone handed me $20, I was just like so happy, and I wasn't sick anymore. And I was like sprinting to the drug dealer to get a little something to like take the edge off so I could get more money to get more later, And I remember even in that moment thinking, where did the withdrawal just go? Like as I'm jogging down the street, but then as soon as I get it and I do it, it was like, is this not real? Is this cut? Is this like, it wasn't changing? Like I had so much hope on the way there. As soon as I gave myself permission to go or had the money to go, I had so much hope it was going to change something without knowing that that's what I was trying to do. Right. But that it was going to just make me okay. And I do it and it stopped making me okay. And it was the most heartbreaking thing because it's like the long-term relationship that is just going wrong now, but you can't leave it. Right. And so you stay in that cycle for such a long time. And each time you say, I'm not going to do it. And you do it. It's like one drop into the well of self-hatred because you're disappointing yourself one more time. And you don't have to show anybody in the world. Nobody in the world can pick up on it. It's so hidden inside. But every time you say, I'm not going to, and you do anyway, you break your own heart. It's just like, and it adds up and it adds up until like you are so lost from yourself on the inside. I mean, just like anyone listening who's questioning whether or not you have any kind of problem, or you kind of know, but you think maybe you can try something else instead of like sobriety. Just, I'm just letting you know that feeling that I'm describing is so private, and you're the only one who knows in a moment of truth with yourself, in your heart and your mind, the truth. It's that dysfunctional relationship with self, so it's like on one hand, you've got like the pain and suffering that's so private. And the only thing that gets rid of that pain is the drug or the drink. And now it's not doing that. But you can't imagine stopping that because it was a solution. And you can't imagine being in that kind of psychic pain that you're in without having, something to comfort you, so you stay in this bad relationship and like the suffering gets worse and worse. And sometimes that's when like you start losing friends, you start, spending more time alone, you start losing jobs, you stop doing the things that interest you. It's just like trying to find that solution to feel okay again. Like you'll go to a yoga retreat and think that's going to do it. I did health food and heroin. Like I'm letting you know, like it might keep you alive a little longer, but it's not going to change that relationship because it really is a relationship. So, I mean, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit about recovery, just to let you know, anyone who's relating to this, is that, they call addiction a disease. It's brain disease, because it's like your mind has to get you to consent to putting a drink in your hand into your mouth, or putting drugs in your hand and into your mouth or your arm, or however you do it. It can't feed itself. So it just wears on you. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. You're not going to do anything today until you go have a drink. So you might as well have a drink now so you can at least go to the dry cleaners today, whatever, it's always looking to get fed. So, and when you start to starve it, it makes a lot of noise. And one of the things it does is it will try to convince you that the pain that you're in will never go away. And it will get worse, because that whole cycle of using to feel normal, it's all based on this fear of controlling future feelings that you're not going to be able to handle, right? Which is just insane, because we can handle feelings or just feelings. But because we've become dependent on not having to really experience the depth of feelings, all we feel are the low feelings that, we can power through until we get high, and then, we're okay. But I'm telling you, it's smoke and mirrors. That whole disease thing, it's like a computer virus that is just going to try and trick you, and it'll feed you all this bullshit that seems real, but it's not based in anything where there's any evidence to prove it. So your heart will be broken when you let go of drugs or alcohol, or whatever your relationship substance is. You'll grieve it, because it was a relationship that you could count on that stopped working, and you stayed in it long after it stopped working, but now it's time to go. So you'll feel a little sad. Yeah, you'll feel a little grief, but this voice in your head will try and turn up the volume on it and tell you this is what it's going to feel like forever. It's never going to change. So when you hear words like never, it's never going to get better, or forever, this is how it is, just know that that's a trick. It's not true. And within 24 hours, you're going to feel a little bit better. And within 48 hours, you're going to feel a little bit better. And it'll have peaks and valleys, because you'll be sort of ping-ponging a little bit along the way, because you have to kind of land back in your body. And when you're weakening the disease, it's going to fight back with every trick it knows, every feeling, every kind of thought that's triggering, that's always worked to get you to consent, right? So, there's a whole way of working around it, but I'm just letting you know, it's just a trick. It's like the little man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. It's not all powerful like it feels like it is. Yeah. But as long as you feed it something, it stays in charge. And it might play nice for a little while and let you just have one glass of wine, but it has a plan. It plays the long game. So I ended up getting on that bus, and I got to Canada, and they didn't have a drug problem in Canada, so they didn't really have rehabs, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was so sick. And I had hepatitis, and I was just a mess. And I was calling. And, I'm so lucky that there are some addicts out there in recovery who are just hustlers. And what they did was they found a few treatment centers in America that would take Canadian health insurance. And they probably skimmed a big chunk of change off of every person they sent. But thank God for them, because I was one of the first people who went. I got into some rehab in New Orleans, and back then it was bare bones. It was like Jack LaLanne jumping jacks outside, and Louise Hay cassette tapes for meditation, and vanilla. I was a vegetarian, so I might as well have been a Satanist down there. They put meat in their vegetables. You can have these greens. We just put a ham hock. I'm like, I can't. So I was living on white bread and ice cream. And iceberg lettuce And I just kept thinking, it's got to get better. It's got to get better than this. But I knew, like I'd heard when I'd gone to a few meetings, the importance of being willing to go to any lengths. And I knew that all the different ways that I came up with a plan on how I was going to get rid of one drug that was the problem and do something else, that I'd never been willing to go all the way. And that if I was, and I really felt like this was my last chance. I didn't know people relapsed and came back. I didn't know any of that. I just thought I was so lucky I got into a rehab, and because I knew if it had been like 4 or 5 more days, I was starting to feel better. That willingness and desire to get clean. I mean, friends in Toronto, because I went up there, they who were drug dealers were phoning me going, something's going on. Why don't you come over? And I knew it was free. And I was like, I can't. I just can't. If I need to have one last one, I'm not going to do this. Like, I have to just not do this, So I was really afraid that the time was running out and that I wouldn't have this resolve, So when I got there, I was like, I'll do anything, and I thought I was, I mean, maybe I was smarter than some of the people in some areas, like we all have our strengths. But I knew the one thing I couldn't dispute is that people who knew how to stay off drugs and how to stay sober knew something that I did not know. And I had to let them teach me how to do it. And I don't know where that humility came from, because I can be, especially then, changed a lot, but especially then I was like so arrogant, like you couldn't tell me shit, and if you didn't do what I did, knew who I knew, and listened to what I listened to, like, you can't tell me anything. And I just had to let these people in the South just like show me how to live, and then I just, I've stayed committed all this time, and I did not turn into somebody else. Like, I didn't have to give up the things I loved. My interests got bigger. I didn't have to get rid of things because, that music or that artist or those books. I mean, there was a period I really loved like Artaud and Nietzsche. Like, I just loved like all the, Sartre. I just loved the stuff that you'd expect some young heroin addict to love. The Velvet Underground. And, I'd read them in recovery, and everybody just looked like they had a drug problem. And like, it just looked like, it took the literature away from me for a little bit. It was just like, oh, this person was just an addict, and blah, blah, it all became like they just needed therapy. And then I was so sad because I thought, these are books that changed my life. Like, I know it's art. Why am I seeing everything through this lens of recovery and therapy? Like, I don't like help. Where did I go? And I'm just letting you know, if that happens to you, it comes back. You go back and you reread the stuff that you loved, and you'll still love it. And you'll see the magic in it. You'll see the talent in it. But, at first it's kind of like you're looking at how many drinks the person 5 tables away from you had. Like, you could tell anybody at your table at any minute. Like, you're still so focused on, like, does the whole world have a problem and I'm the only one with the secret?
Yeah. When do you feel like that shifted for you?
You just kind of land into yourself. I think I was so, I knew that once I got clean and I got back to Los Angeles, the truth was that, and I'm grateful that, I'm grateful for a lot of things, because I was an only child for so long, for my childhood, even though I'm not an only child now. I knew how to entertain myself. I read a lot, I wrote a lot, I would do magic shows and puppet shows, and whatever it took to bring my milkshakes brought all the boys to the yard. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it took, I was like, I'm going to entertain you so that you will come to my backyard, because I needed to get people there, because I didn't know that having an alcoholic father was kind of like, getting in the way of my friendships. Because I was alone, and and then I had this full crazy life that really I found interesting, If I wrote about it, people would find it interesting, because it really, it was an adventure. And then it got dark, and then it got very lonely, and then I was going to die. Right. So, but in that last period, when I was alone and living in an abandoned building in Los Angeles with a car with Canadian plates that didn't have any tags, no insurance, and I was like driving to a strip club in the valley and going to really, really bad neighborhoods, and, I saw a documentary on this horrible hotel that one of the serial killers, like the Zodiac killer, had lived in, on Netflix. And I used to go into that hotel to buy drugs in the middle of the night by myself.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So I saw that, and it was like a body memory, like, whoa, and yet at the same time, I'm in this abandoned building, and I thought, I'm going to reread all of Kerouac while I'm here. I was like this arty bag lady. I just saw this as like the dark period, but I had hope that it wasn't the end. But at a certain point you go, this is really my life. Like, you're alone. But because I'd spent my childhood alone, the conversations that were going on were between me and me. So I remember them as if they're conversations. So it's really hard to hide the truth from myself, because I was the only one there. And so I knew that I was the greatest danger to myself. It wasn't going to be some hot guy that wanted to have a drink with me. It wasn't going to be like some group of people at like an art opening that I felt I needed to know, who were going to pull out Coke, and I'd have to be like, oh, okay. I knew that I didn't need anybody to destroy myself. I could do it by myself. And so because of that, I really glued on to people who were on a recovering path, because I knew I couldn't spend too much time alone with my mind, because I knew it was dangerous. And so, I really kind of put the focus that first year of recovery into just building relationships with friends, like having friends and doing things, and having a sense of humor about just how limited and small my life now was, knowing that it wouldn't stay that way. But, it was like I'm sitting in some like late night AA meeting because the boys were cuter on a Friday night. And I'm thinking, I used to decorate parties for Andy Warhol. Like, what am I doing here? And it was like, nobody's inviting you. Like, that world, you left that world, and you don't have all those things going on right now. You have this going on. It's just temporary. This is like important. I just knew it was important to invest into myself, because it really, and now, and this was the 80s, right? So now they know more about addiction, and they know there's a thing called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So if you have been using, drugs for a period of time, a long period of time, I don't know how long, it doesn't have to be that long, a few years, say you've been like doing a lot of benzos and Ambien and Adderall, say you've stayed away from hard drugs, even though I'll tell you, those are just like mimicking all the hard drugs I used to take. but, if you're taking something that's physically addictive, and you have the whole everything about your relationship to drugs or alcohol has been some method of self-soothing, even if it was in a party atmosphere. When you stop, when I say you kind of ping pong until you land back in your body, they call that post-acute withdrawal syndrome. So in that first year, you land back present in the present moment, in your body, experiencing your feelings as they come, to the best of your ability. Like, you'll get crushes on people, and you'll like exercise like 90 hours a week, or you'll like eat until like you hate yourself there and end up in some other program trying to deal with that, or you'll starve yourself, or you'll go bankrupt shopping too much, or you'll work 90 hours a week and become really successful at what you do. Like, you're going to do things to change how you feel as much as you can in that first year. But as long as you have people around you who know who you are, who struggle with the same thing, who can make you laugh at just how crazy you are, and give you hope that like you won't be crazy forever. You'll get through it without having to use again, without having to relapse, you know.
So you're saying having the support that first year is crucial. That's what helped save you and helped you be sober and still are to this day.
Well, I just feel like it's an investment into yourself, you know, and you know, the whole thing with this whole idea of the disease of addiction, like I just always like to think of it more as like an invasion of the body snatchers kind of science fiction thing that, you know, doesn't matter how it's in you, doesn't matter. You know, it's there, it's permanent. All you can do is weaken it. You can only weaken it by starving it, because as soon as you feed it something, it is back in the power seat. So it is like talking to you, and you don't even know it's talking to you. And it's telling you to be afraid of your feelings, to be afraid of the future. The feelings you're going to have in the future. Control everything, you know, and it's going to tell you it's not there. What voice? You know, and so you just starve it, and then you have more freedom, you know, and you still get hurt, you know, you still like have days that, you know, you're like, oh, more shit to uncover, more shit to work on. But like things are constantly changing and getting better and getting different. Like I get bored really easily. And if I could stay interested in recovery for, what is it, 34 years? Like there has to be something to it. Like people don't, like when I first thought about people being off drugs and alcohol, the way I felt in the beginning, you know, that feeling I was describing where you're like suffering without it, you're hating yourself as soon as you get it, you only have hope on your way to get it. I thought that that's what people who were sober felt like all the time, and that they just went to meetings to just like not kill themselves and learn to accept that that's how shitty life is going to feel, but you're not going to drink. Like I thought that's what it was, because I never got past that. Right. I'd always like make it 3 days or 4 days and then give myself an excuse to like have a drink or smoke a joint or something to get the ball rolling. So, you know, it's always staying interesting. And what's interesting is the relationship, like getting to know yourself, like really know yourself and really accept yourself, like your assets, your liabilities. Yeah. You know, like not feel like if you're having a day where you've been like, oh, I've been really self-absorbed again today, and people have seen it, not feeling like I have to move to another town and never talk to those people again. Like I can just call them and go, wow, I was really self-absorbed today. Sorry, I dominated the conversation through all afternoon. And my friends know me, they'll just be like, well, you were a little selfish today. But I don't feel like I have to, you know, it doesn't make me want to explode with shame. Like the shame is gone. You know, it's just like, well, that was that kind of day. Thank God every day is not like that, but at least I'm aware enough that like I don't have to have people point things out. It's just like, oh, what's going on with me?
Mm-hmm.
Am I worried about something? Am I like, where is there, like, am I like living in some you know, idea of lack, that I'm not going to have my needs met?
I'm curious though, you need to get to know yourself, but if you hate yourself so much, why would you ever want to be sober to get to know yourself when you hate yourself?
But I don't, you know, like we'll joke and say I hated myself, but I think it's more just disappointed myself. I hurt myself.
Yeah.
I think hurt and hate get mixed up a lot when people talk about like how they feel about themselves. Like I just hurt myself a lot. I abandoned myself. So recovery has been an experience of like getting to know myself, you know, and just, you know, when people talk about what's spiritual or self-love, like getting to know yourself and having a relationship with yourself is spiritual, because it's an act of love for yourself, you know, and like life, we always say life is short, but life is long. I'll tell you, like right now, I'm 62. Life is long. You get to reinvent yourself a lot of times along the way. You get to be like a good person some years, and some years you can be a lazy person, and some years you can be an ambitious person, but it's all part of the ride, and none of it's greater or less than anything else. And everybody is going through something, so like once you start to realize like your own struggles and you start to like heal, like instead of looking at a friend who you always thought was just an asshole, like you can see where their pain is, and you can lead them towards healing whatever it is. It's not even drugs. Like you can be an ear for them, because like that space to care about others and the room, like I used to, when I remember in the beginning, I felt like my energy was like a gas tank, and there were some people who just bled me out like psychic vampires, and I just like couldn't be around them. And then someone said, oh, you could just like ask the universe to refill your tank at any time. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. So like you start to have room and space to really deeply care about other people in ways that like you wanted to and you thought you did, but you always kind of knew deep down, like if you never saw them again, you'd be okay. Like you just think that it wasn't true. I thought that about my first husband, and then when he wasn't there, it really wasn't okay. But the whole time I was with him, I'd just be thinking, am I really that shallow? Like if he left tomorrow, like it wouldn't even change my life. Like because I was so shut down with drugs, I couldn't access what my true feelings were, So like once you start to have a relationship with yourself and things start to heal, like there's just room for more, room for more joy.
Well, let's talk about your journey from being in rehab to what you do now and what your work looks like now. How did you get to that point of, okay, now I'm actually going to help people that were me?